Hey there, fellow creators, Ben here from Cinder Studios, and last month we talked about 5 things from the art store that are kind of unnecessary and a little bit overpriced. This month we are flipping the script and I'm talking about 5 art supplies that are expensive, but in my opinion, totally worth the money. Stick around. So while there are certain ways to create little DIY shortcuts for creating art, there's definitely some supplies that don't really qualify for that. And those are what I want to talk about today. 5 supplies that I think, regardless of your budget, you should probably get the more expensive quality one. The first of these materials is good watercolor paper. This one, you might think, oh, so something good, well, I'll pick up, like Strathmore 400 series or like the Canson XL. That's a good watercolor paper, right? I would say these 2 options are an entry-level watercolor paper. You should probably be looking for something notably, I don't want to say more expensive, but yeah, more expensive. Things that, arches. Strathmore does make a higher quality one. Canson Montreal papers. Fluid watercolor paper is really good, especially if you see anything that says 100% cotton. That's even better. Watercolor paper can really make or break your individual painting. Not only the quality of the paper, but also the texture of the paper. Standard watercolor paper is usually cold press, which is just sort of a nice medium texture. There is rough watercolor paper. I really love this stuff, but it's definitely less effective for something like a portrait. And then there's hot press watercolor paper, which is super, super smooth. Knowing the difference between all 3 of these can really make it so you're making better decisions about the painting you're making. I had a video about this a couple of years back where I compared sort of a cheaper watercolor paper to a more expensive, thicker Arches rough watercolor paper. And the difference between those 2, using like the exact same relatively cheap paints, was astronomical. My suggestion anytime anyone's playing with watercolors is get really good paper, and then you can probably cheapen out on your brushes and your paints a little bit, because if the paper is good, everything else will fall into place a lot easier. A decent watercolor paper is definitely one of those materials that if you've never experienced it, you're not going to know exactly what you're missing. I think a lot of people just get turned off by watercolors as a whole, just because their paper isn't that good. Next up, we are sticking in paper land, and I want to talk about bristle paper. I love bristle paper. Some people call it bristle board because it is a relatively thick paper itself, but a sheet of bristle paper is remarkably incredible. If you're only ever used to using just regular traditional drawing and sketch papers, bristle paper is going to give you just a little more texture. If you get the vellum bristle paper has a little bit of tooth to it. They also sell smooth bristle paper, which is notably smoother. Can be a little confusing on the name there. But the smooth paper is just a buttery smoothness. I don't have any in the studio to show you guys that difference in texture, but believe me, it's there. If I'm doing any kind of major, serious, even full-scale drawing, especially with traditional inks or graphite, I always reach for bristle paper. It is amazing. Everything from just the way that your pencil or pen will apply down to that surface, as well as I find that bristle paper erases really well. And the extra thickness of the paper means that if you're erasing a lot, you're not going to damage the paper the way you would with a thinner drawing or sketch paper. The extra thickness of bristle also allows you to apply some extra heavier and thicker media. I've even played with watercolors and acrylics on bristle paper with a lot less warping than you'd get otherwise with, again, a much thinner paper. The third supply, which is expensive but totally worth it, I would say is this particular line of watercolors from Daniel Smith called their Primatech colors. These are really interesting colors. Specifically because they're not necessarily made with pigment as much as they are made with ground up gems and minerals and stones and things like that. Almost every one of these colors has a unique shimmery quality to it, and it's one of those things that, while there are metallic watercolors in other brands, nothing quite does it like these do. The fourth art supply I think is absolutely totally worth it, is some sort of higher end brand of colored pencils. A lot of people swear by the Prismacolors. I like them a lot too. But anything from the Faber-Castell Polychromos to Derwent Inktense pencils. Actually, Inktense might be their watercolor pencils. Either way, a quality bunch of colored pencils. Now granted, getting a big pack of colored pencils, especially of a quality brand, is a price point. But at a certain point, it is an investment. Now, a lot of places, Blix included, will sell pencils open stock, and it's a really great way to build up your own set and find colors that maybe, I don't want to necessarily drop, $200 on a pencil set. Let's just get like one or two at a time and build up a set of my own. No matter how you do it, it's 100% worth it. If you're used to bargain basement colored pencils like Crayola, for example, and you have never really experienced a higher end colored pencil, you might not know how creamy and buttery smooth that those pencils are. Now, it's certainly possible to do, blending techniques and layering techniques with a cheap colored pencil, but you're not going to get the durable, light, fast pigments the way you would in a more expensive brand, nor will you get the just ease of use with them. A lot of times in a cheaper colored pencil, you're looking at a little bit more wax or clay being added in to compensate for various things, but the higher quality pencils are going to be way more pigment oriented, and in that case are going to be much better for creating larger and even more professional drawings. And the fifth and final art supply that personally I think is absolutely worth every penny is a nice high quality acrylic paint. Yes, there are other brands besides Golden. Liquitex Professional is really excellent. The Utrecht Artist paints are very, very good too. Winsor & Newton has an incredible line of acrylics. But, at least in my opinion, getting especially a cheaper quality acrylic paint really comes with a lot of problems. If you're unfamiliar with my big long video on craft paint versus student grade paint versus professional acrylics, it's worth checking out. Really break down all of those differences between those paints. Now, while it is of course possible to make even professional quality work with very cheap paint, a lot of times what you end up with is that paint just being harder to work with or just not looking as good in the long run. High quality acrylics are guaranteed to be really excellent in terms of light fastness. You have a variety of different ways to manipulate that paint, whether that be thinning it out or thickening up with mediums and gels, as well as just the fact that there are differences in viscosity, there are differences in transparency. You're going to have opaque colors, you're going to have transparent colors, you're going to have super thin paint, you're going to have super thick paint. However you want to paint, as long as you're using a higher quality acrylic, you can do that in any capacity you can possibly think of. And there's not a lot of mediums that can really boast that. So that's just a quick look at 5 expensive art supplies that I think are totally worth it. Are they pricey? Yes. But are you getting what you pay for? Absolutely. There is no reason to cheapen out on something that won't perform as well, and something, a cheaper medium or a cheaper paint that maybe just is, I'm struggling, I can't get this to look right. Oh, I must not be any good. Sometimes it is just the stuff you're working with. Bumping yourself up to a higher quality can sometimes bump up your skill level, or at least make it easier to learn. Now, obviously, a cheap paint versus an expensive paint is not going to make a difference for a beginner who doesn't understand things like color mixing and value, but it's going to make those things a lot easier to learn and a lot easier to do in your work. But that was just my thought on 5 different art supplies that I think are, while expensive, worth every penny. I'm curious what you guys have to say about this. What are some expensive supplies that you use that you could probably never replace with anything cheaper? As always, let me know your thoughts in comments below. Hit the like button if you learned something or enjoyed this video or just like hearing me talk about art stuff. Get subscribed if you're not already, and this has been from Cinder Studios reminding you to keep on creating, and I will see you guys next time. These are really... oh, that's not that one.